buried in the rubble of her home of a missile attack in Lebanon. God raised her up to become a force and a voice for righteousness in the earth. Tonight, our guest is no stranger to controversy. 3 New York Times best-selling books. You've seen her on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, Newsmax, and she has been a voice and a force for good in this nation for decades, and how God brought her out and placed her where she is today to be a force for good. She is the author of the new book, Rise, in Defense of Judeo-Christian Values and Freedom, and she's the founder and chairman of Act for America, the largest national grassroots organization of its kind in the nation. You are going to be blown away. You're going to want to share this with as many people as you possibly can. It's going to get you fired up and show you what you can do to make a difference in America. Here she is, Brigitte Gabriel. It is so good to have you on Encounter today. We've been trying so hard to get you here. Seems like the devil's been trying everything to stop it, but we're so glad you're here.
Everything. I am so delighted to be with you. So delighted to share my testimony with you and share what God has in store for all of us in this amazing, wonderful world that He created for us.
Your testimony is unlike anything that I think I've ever heard. And everybody watching, I want you to share this. I want you to comment. I want you to engage with us, especially if you can relate with a lot of what you're sharing. But I want to start back. I want to go back to the 70s. I want to go to Lebanon, and I want to hear your story about how the Lord brought you to the place where you are right now. Some amazing things that have happened. So let's go back in the 70s in Lebanon and tell us your testimony.
Wow. Where do I start? Well, I'm an only child. I was born in Lebanon to a Lebanese businessman and his wife, who were trying to have a baby for 22 years and were unable to have a child. And finally, I showed up in their life. Truly a blessing and a miracle from God. My mother had me. She was 55 years old, and my father was 60. Wow. And I opened my book when I started talking about my life with my mother sitting at a doctor's office. She thought she had cancer. I mean, of course, her stomach is getting bigger and harder. And, when you're that age, you think, oh, Lord, spare me. I'm just, I'm going to die. What's going on? And they do the blood work. And the doctor told her, you're going to be blessed with a child. You're not dying. You are pregnant. So they couldn't believe it. So when I was born, I was truly a miracle in my parents' lives. And the whole town came, bringing presents, to my parents. I remember the church bringing incense and the priest coming to bless our home. And so
now, what kind of church was this? What kind of church was this in Lebanon?
Well, I grew up in the Maronite Church, which is a part of the Catholic Church. My parents were devout Christian. My father raised the money to build the church in our hometown. And he and my mother were very involved in the church. So that's the home I was born into. And what most people don't realize, Alan, is that Lebanon used to be a majority Christian country in the Middle East. When I was born, Lebanon was over 67% Christian. The Muslims were the minority.
I did not know this, actually, until I read your testimony. This is outstanding.
Yeah, because people don't realize that. When you look at the Middle East, Lebanon is the only Christian country, used to be, and Israel was the only Jewish country. And in a sea surrounded by the Arabic world, where you can identify every country with one man or one tribe, a one-man regime, Lebanon is a republic, just like the United States of America. And that was the downfall of Lebanon. So when I was born into the country, Lebanon used to be Paris of the Middle East, the banking capital of the Middle East. Actually, in 1965, National Geographic magazine had on its front cover, Lebanon, Eden of the Middle East, because we had the commerce, we had the universities. People used to send their children from all the surrounding Arabic world to study in our universities because we had built the best universities. They stayed and worked in our economy because we had built the best economy in the Middle East, even though we did not have any oil. Lebanon became Paris of the Middle East. Unfortunately, all that began to change as the Muslims became the majority and we became the minority. And that happened through the birth rate, and not just the birth rate on the Muslim side, but also through the refugees that we have accepted into the country. You see, Lebanon was the only country in the Middle East to accept the third wave of Palestinian refugees, where none of the other Arabic countries wanted them. But Lebanon, being a Christian nation, open-minded, fair, tolerant, do unto others what you want others to do unto you, we welcomed all these refugees and we took them in.
Wow.
And that tipped the scale. And they ended up using our democracy, all these people we took in, the Palestinians, to destroy our democracy.
What an interesting parallel with where we are right now. And we're going to go over to the Encounter Underground podcast soon, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that, because I think that's so prophetic for where we are right now as a country. But to realize that and to see that Lebanon was in the place where it's... So what happened? What was the transition? You've got polygamy, you've got multiple wives and lots of kids, and then you have immigration, and that tips the scales in a republic. And what was kind of the saturation point, or the point where it just all moved in a different direction?
Well, after the Palestinian influx into Lebanon in the 70s, when I was a child, I remember we used to go to Beirut. I lived in a little town in South Lebanon, and we used to go to Beirut, the capital, to spend Christmas and Easter with the rest of the family. And then we stopped traveling, and I would ask my father, how come we're not going to be with the family for Christmas this year? And my father would tell me, well, we decided to stay home. Well, the reason I found out later, obviously, as I grew up, is because once the Palestinians and the Muslims became the majority in the country, they started setting up fly-by-night checkpoints. And they would stop cars traveling, and they would check people's IDs. And in the Middle East, our religious identity is written on our national ID. You are either a Christian, a Muslim, or a Jew. So when they would stop a car and they would see that the whole family in the car is a Christian family, they would get everyone out of the car and shoot them in cold blood. The word traveled fast, and Christians became prisoners to their homes and communities. Actually, Thomas Friedman writes about it in his book From Beirut to Jerusalem, about this killing. He called it identity killing at that time. And so we became prisoners to our home and towns, and that's why we stopped traveling. And all that was okay until about 1975, when radical Islamists blew up my home as they were trying to take our town. We are the last Christian 2 towns left in South Lebanon, and they were trying to take over our town. And in 1975, they launched the rocket, aiming it at the military base above my house. They missed the military base, and all 14 rockets exploded in my home, bringing it down, burying me under the rubble wounded. And my life changed that day.
So what happens next then? So you're buried under the rubble. Who comes to your rescue, and where do you go from here?
Well, I was under the rubble for almost 24 hours. They couldn't pull me out. And finally, when they were able to pull me out, I ended up in a hospital for 2.5 months. And as I laid in a hospital bed, hooked up to IVs in both arms, I would ask my father, why did they do this to us? And my father would tell me, because we are Christians, they consider us infidels and they want to kill us. So I learned since I was a 10-year-old little girl that I am wanted dead simply because I was born into the Christian faith and lived in a Christian town. So we ended up leaving the hospital and coming back home. But my home was no longer the home I left. I ended up living underground in an 8-by-10 room bomb shelter, without electricity, without water, and very little food. And that's where I lived for the next 7 years of my life, from the age of 10 till the age of 17, robbed of my youth.
Yeah, your childhood stolen from you, and in a bunker underneath the ground. So what does it look? How do you get fresh water? What does that look like for you as a child?
Well, we didn't have any fresh water because the Palestinian and Islamists surrounded our town. They cut off the electricity. They cut off the water. They cut off food supplies coming into our town. So I remember living in the bomb shelter. And in the beginning, we thought, my father would say, it's a matter of days before all the big Christian countries in the world will see what's happening to the Christians in Lebanon, and they will get involved. And my daddy would say, America's going to come. Australia's going to come. France is going to come. Canada's going to come. And we waited and we waited and we waited, and the world forgot about us. And I remember for 2 weeks we slept in cardboard boxes because we thought, oh, it's just a matter of days. But days turned into months and months turned into years as the world forgot about us. And so to get food, we would go out around our bomb shelter and dig out dandelions and different grass and different vegetation that grew around our bomb shelter. And that was the only salads we had to eat. To get some water, we would crawl out to a nearby spring. My town was named Marjayoun, Valley of Springs. We had 7 springs in my hometown. And so we would crawl under sniper's bullets to the spring near our house. And what used to take a 5-minute walk would take us 2 hours crawling in a ditch because we were surrounded by Islamic snipers shooting at us. And every time we left our bomb shelter to go get water, my mother and I would leave. My father could not leave because my father's eardrums were blown up during the bombing of our home. So he became deaf. So he couldn't hear if a bomb was falling down. So my father would stay in the bomb shelter, and my mother and I had to go get water. So you can imagine how frustrating that was to my father, you know, the head of the household, the supposedly protector and provider, not be able to take care of his wife and his young daughter because of his disability in hearing. So we would go and we would say our last goodbyes every time, Ellen, every single time we left our bomb shelter, because we did not know if we're going to come back alive or dead just to get a drink of water. We lived in the mountains. Marjayoun was in the mountains. And I remember in the wintertime, it would be freezing cold and we didn't have any heat. And my father would go out and break twigs from trees that surrounded our bomb shelter. And he would bring them in and he would pour benzene or mazout or, you know, gas or different things, you know, to ignite the fire. And we would huddle around the fire in our bomb shelter. And we didn't have any ventilations. We only had one door entry into the bomb shelter. And many nights we had an agreement. Whoever woke up first would drag the other 2 outside and slap them on the face to make sure we wake up, because many nights we would pass out because of carbon monoxide poisoning. And this became my existence. I remember when I was 13 years old, 3 years after the war started, and I remember one of our Christian militia, at that time, our Christian militia were protecting our town, and we lost a lot of men up to that point. And I remember one of my friends stopped by and he said, Brigitte, I just want you to know, we heard a lot of chatter on the radios and we believe we're going to be attacked tonight in a major attack. And he said, if I don't see you tonight, because I don't think our town is going to last, I think tonight our town is going to fall in the hands of the Islamists. And he said, if I don't see you tomorrow, I wish you a merciful death. And he gave me a hug and he left. And I remember at the age of 13, dressing in my burial clothes, in my Sunday best, my Easter dress, because I wanted to look pretty, knowing that when they come to slaughter me, there would be no one to bury me. And I remember sobbing, begging my mother, I don't want to die. I'm only 13 years old. Please do something. I don't want to die. And my mother couldn't say anything to me. And I remember we sat in the corner of our bomb shelter, and my father opened up his Bible, and he started reading from Psalms. I shall walk into the valley of death and fear no evil, for thou art with me. And my parents said to me, we lived a long life. You are a young child. When they come to slaughter us tonight, we will create a distraction. We just want you to run as far and as fast as you can and don't look back and run towards the border with Israel. You see, we lived 5 kilometers from Metula, the northern border of Israel. And we knew if we run to the Jews and beg for help, because remember, we were surrounded on all sides by the Muslims except to our back because we bordered Israel. And we knew if we go to Israel and beg for help, the Jews are not going to slaughter us because we had more shared values with them than we had with the Muslims. And thank God that night, few people from my town went to Israel actually and begged for help. And Israel came in physically and set up the security zone around our area. And that's the only reason we stayed alive. And they set up the security zone in our area, and we became a part of the security zone. And that's how we ended up surviving for another 5 years in the bomb shelter, with Israel coming in the middle of the night, bringing in food for the children, food for the military, training the military, supplying weaponry so we can defend ourselves. And that's how we stayed alive until 1982, when Israel came in physically working with the Christians in Lebanon, because Israel wanted to protect Lebanese democracy, because if Lebanese democracy fell, Iran and Hezbollah would be on the border with Israel. So Israel came in physically into Lebanon and established a security zone, and then came in working with the Christians and went all the way, invaded Lebanon all the way into Beirut, and were able to kick out Yasser Arafat to Tunisia and his cronies. And that's how we came out of the bomb shelter and back to rebuilding our lives.
Wow, it's stunning to see your father, even after all that, to open his Bible and to read from Psalm 23. And during that time, what was it like? What was there? Because there are other Christians in the community. They're all bunkered down, right? They're all hiding. They're all trying to preserve their lives. What was it like worshiping God, or what was it like within the church at that time? Were people coming together? Were they scattering? Were there moments where you could come together and worship? What did it look like?
It was very few times where we can come together. Mm-hmm. Many Sundays church services will be canceled. Many days during the week church services will be canceled, depending on the war. I remember for 3-4 years, we didn't even have Christmas. I remember, this is so sad for me. I remember many Christmas nights, we slept on the floor when we first went into the bomb shelter, because we had renters in our compound who ended up staying with us. So we were 9 children in the bomb shelter. And I remember we all laid on the floor, on the dirt with just blankets. And I remember we had lice in our head. It's the stuff that people do not want to talk about. Yeah. Which I detail my life story actually in my book titled Because They Hate. So for people who want to know all the details, they can get that book.
We'll put a link in the description of this video.
Yeah.
Get it.
But even, we are all little girls and our hair on each other. And I remember lice in our hair. And I remember Christmas Eve sitting. And I remember my parents sometimes singing Christian songs, not knowing we're going to wake up in the morning. And usually on the holidays, on the high holidays, like on Good Friday or Christmas or Easter, we would be bombed all night long, like rain. And we would just sit there just shaking out of fear, and our parents would just snuggle us in. And it was sad. There was no worship. The only prayer we had was, please keep us alive. Please keep us alive. My parents tried to keep, the joy going. Oh, it's Christmas. Or my mother would cook something special. But this went on for like 3-4 years until Israel came in and established a security zone. And then we would have services depending whether we had shooting or not. Then it became a little bit less, so we would get notification when they're going to be shooting. But that became our existence. And I remember before Israel invaded, the last Easter in 1982, I remember being in the choir. I was in the choir. So, I would go up to church for choir practice. I remember we had like a month really quiet, and a friend of mine, Chuck, he went to a different church. He was Roman Catholic. I went to the Maronite church. We both were in the choir, and he would meet me and we would walk back together home, after the choir, service. And I remember being ready for Easter, so excited. I was wearing a dress that actually used to be my mother's dress because we couldn't buy clothes. My mother would cut her clothes to make me fit into them, and which you would custom make them for me. And I remember my mother had taken one of her dresses and she cut it down, re-sewed it to fit me. And I was so excited, to wear it to church. And I remember being in the church service on Sunday and that Easter, and somebody ran in and they said, we just had an attack and they're going to be shelling our town. And, everybody scattered. And I remember running home. And that day they started shelling us, and my friend Chuck ended up dying. I mean, I remember sitting at the Easter lunch, and my mother had prepared even a dish for him because he was going to eat with us. And I remember going to the border when we heard that some people died, and I remember seeing his body in a bag. And when you go through that as a teenager, these are things that impact your life, that alters your life, that you either go totally as an atheist or it increases your faith in God. And in my situation as a Christian, there was nothing else but faith. You couldn't find an atheist in town. It strengthened my relationship with God because there was nobody else to turn to. When you're totally and completely helpless, where you know your life could end at any moment, you have nothing but you and your Creator praying and saying, I know I have no control over my life. I know there is nothing I can do to change what's happening around me. I just lay my life at your feet and I pray that your will be done. And if it is your will for me to go, please make it merciful and fast, whether for me or for my family or for my loved one. And that really changes your life. It changes your life.
Yeah, most people don't even have to think about that. They don't even have to, although in some American cities things are getting pretty rough out there, but most Americans, most people in the Western world don't even have to think about things like that. And then Israel comes in and establishes this kind of defense bubble. How old are you at that time? And then when did you move from Lebanon? Did you move from Lebanon to the United States, or what was the next phase of your life?
Well, I ended up moving. Okay, so this is a great story I've got to share with you. So during the war, I knew Israel was our friend, and Israel was the only people, that they were keeping us alive. And in the 1982 war, as Israel was working with the Christians to bombard the radical Islamists and Palestinians to move them out of our area, they were shelling us frantically. And during the last day of the shelling, a bomb exploded in front of my bomb shelter where my mother was wounded. For my mother, we had to take her to Israel because Israel was our only lifeline. So anybody who got wounded, we had to go to Israel for treatment. And Israel would provide treatment free of charge for anybody who needed treatment. And so I remember having to take my mother to the bombed out hospital in our town, where Israel had put on one Israeli doctor on duty. He was a soldier, a part of the Israeli soldiers, and 2 Israeli nurses to give people first aid, and then donated an Israeli ambulance to drive people to the border so they can be driven to hospital. So I knew we had to take my mother to the hospital in Lebanon to give her first aid and then take her to Israel for treatment. Before we left our bomb shelter, my father pulls out of the mattress in the bomb shelter $60. And he said, here's some money in case you need it, since they're going to have to take your mother to Israel. And I remember touching money for the first time in my life, because when you live in a bomb shelter, you don't go shopping. So I remember taking the money and putting it in my pocket. We took my mother to the hospital in town, the bomb out hospital. They give my mother first aid. They put her in an Israeli donated ambulance. And the ambulance literally flies to the border, which is about 10-minute drive, while we're being shot at by snipers from the Muslims. We get to the border. The driver was a Lebanese driver who knew my family. We got to the border. They take my mother out of the ambulance in Lebanon, and they put her inside another Israeli ambulance to drive her to the nearest hospital in Israel, Itzfat Hospital, which is about an hour from Metula, from the border. The Lebanese driver walks around the ambulance and asks me if I had any money for the car ride. And like an innocent teenager, I pull all the money out of my pocket and I hand it to him. And I said, how much do I owe you? And he looks at my money and he says, give me 30, which was half the money I had. He knew exactly how much I had. I gave it to him and I thanked him for the ride. And they take my mother, they put her inside an Israeli ambulance, another one. And this time, the driver was an Israeli soldier who was just called in for Miloyim, which is the Israeli reserve because Israel was at war. And he drives us from the border to Yitzfat, about an hour. And as we were driving, we would be passing by all the Israeli tanks lined up to invade Lebanon. And the Israeli driver was so nice. He would explain to me what was happening, what they were saying on the radio, and the tanks. We get to the Israeli hospital, and they take my mother out of the ambulance and into the emergency room. And I walk around the ambulance to the Israeli driver to basically pay him for the ambulance fee. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, Lord, if the 10-minute ride cost me $30, I'm sure this is not going to be enough. And I took the money out of my pocket and I handed it to the Israeli driver. And I said, how much do I owe you? And he looked at the money and he said, what is this for? And I said, this is the fee for the ambulance ride. Yeah, I hope it's enough. That's all I have. And he said to me, you don't owe me anything. This is a free service from us to you. Keep your money and take good care of your mother. I wish her a speedy recovery. And he just gave me a smile and he laughed. And I remember thinking to myself, what an honest man. What a man of integrity. This man could have taken my money and gone and partied with it all night, and I would not have known the difference. I would have been thankful he only took $30. And that's when I became angry, because I realized that the Lebanese driver who actually knew my parents basically robbed me.
Wow.
That was the first lesson between the Israeli culture and the Arabic culture. We get into the hospital, and there were hundreds of people in the emergency room laid down on the floor. Remember, this is a war zone. This is a war scene. And the Israeli doctors were taking care of the wounded. And I'm looking around, and there were Israeli soldiers wounded brought in from Lebanon, Christian wounded brought in from Lebanon, Muslims wounded brought in from Lebanon, Palestinian wounded brought in from Lebanon. And I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought to myself, I can understand why the doctors are taking care of me. I'm a Christian. I am their ally. I am their friend. But why on earth were they taking care of the Muslims and the Palestinians who would slit their throat in 30 seconds if they get a chance to? Little did I know about the humanity of the Israeli people. The doctors treated everyone according to their injury. They did not see religion. They did not see political affiliation. They did not see nationality. They treated people according to their needs. The doctor treated my mother before he treated the Israeli soldier laying next to her, because her injury was more severe. They took my mother to the 4th floor of the hospital, and they put her there with 2 other ladies in the same room. One lady was Muslim, one lady was Druze, brought in that same day from Lebanon. And we were not in the room but maybe 5 minutes, and I heard all this commotion outside our window. And the nurses were running from the nurses' station through our room and out to the balcony to see what was happening. And I walk out to the balcony, and 2 Israeli helicopters had just landed, bringing in Israeli soldiers wounded in Lebanon and taking them in on stretchers, one after another. And I remember standing at that balcony, looking down. I didn't even make eye contact with anyone around me. I was feeling sick to my stomach. I was feeling sad. I was feeling frustrated. I was feeling humiliated after all these people are dead, are wounded because of the war with my country. I was surrounded by people on the balcony, but I was afraid to make eye contact with anybody because I didn't know how they're going to react to me. And all of a sudden, I feel this tapping on my shoulder. And an Israeli nurse was standing next to me. And she said to me, you are new here, aren't you? And I said, yes, they just brought in my mother. She's in this room. And without skipping a beat, she puts her arm around me. And she said, oh, don't worry. We're going to take good care of her. And if you need anything, just call my name. My name is Leah. And I couldn't believe my ears. I started crying because for the first time in my life, I experienced compassion. I experienced love without borders. I experienced a human quality that I knew that my culture will not be able to give or express to the Jewish people. I knew that they had something even I did not have. They were able to love and forgive their enemies in a way I wasn't able to. And I was a Christian who was supposed to love like Jesus taught. I knew if I was a Jew standing in any hospital, in anywhere in the Arabic world, I will be thrown to my death and lynched as shouts of Allahu Akbar would echo through the hospital and down the surrounding streets. I spent 22 days in that hospital. Those days changed my life, changed the way I listened to information, changed the way I listened to the news. I knew that the Arab street, the Arabic children are fed a lie about the Jews that is so far from reality. And even though I was raised in a Christian household who didn't teach hate, who taught only love as Christians, I knew that a sea of an Arabic world surrounding Israel was teaching nothing but hatred, and they didn't know anything about the Israeli people. I had to go back to Lebanon, but I vowed that one day I will return to Israel. One day I will come live among those people whose values I respected, whose character I wanted to adopt. And I was so blessed to be able to return to Israel in 1984 and work as news anchor for World News in the Middle East.
Oh my goodness. And now it's starting to make sense. Your passion for the nation of Israel, which we have seen, anyone who's familiar with you and your work across the media, it's been evident, but we haven't known the story behind it, and it's becoming crystal clear now, which is why Rise begins to make sense now in defense of Judeo-Christian values. This book, ladies and gentlemen, is amazing. You want to get your hands on it. We're going to put a link in the description here where she really tackles a lot of these issues. And as we dive kind of deeper into this, where does this transition take place? How do you get involved in the news media, especially working in Israel?
Well, I wanted a job, any job that will take care of my parents. I'm an only child. I'm a girl in the Middle East. I don't have any brothers. My father is old. He cannot work. He's also deaf. So I had to provide for my family. And I wanted a job. So I wanted to work in Israel. I wanted to go back to Israel. I ended up getting a job as a production assistant in Jerusalem, working for Global News Network in Jerusalem for Middle East Television. And I ended up working as a production assistant. And so I got the job and I started working there. You know, my parents, of course, they gave me every excuse. Oh, please stay next to our house. Who's going to take care of us? We're old people. But they knew that I had to take care of my career and provide for them as well. So working as a production assistant in Jerusalem, I was able to work in Israel Monday through Friday and drive back home 4 hours up to Lebanon and take care of my parents, you know, Saturday and Sunday over the weekend. And I would drive back, and they were able to see me on television. I later became news anchor for World News. It's amazing how God works in our lives. Yes. So I applied for the job, you know, to be a news anchor. Obviously, I don't get picked in the beginning because, you know, I have the tan skin, I have the long curly hair, I have the big lips, which is all the qualities. I was slim, which is all the non-attractive qualities in my culture. So they ended up hiring somebody blonde, overweight, split teeth, pale skin, straight hair. So I lost that job. So 6 months into it, the news anchor quit because she hated Israel. She did not want to live in Israel. So my boss called me into his office 6 p.m. on a Tuesday night. He said, "You are on the air tomorrow as news anchor. Paula, your news anchor quit, and tomorrow you're news anchor." So my first day on the air as news anchor was 5/5/1985. And I'll never forget that day. And I remember just going on the air, having no knowledge, no experience, just winging it as I go along. And it's amazing when God opens a door for you, and when his purpose for you is to do something, a certain job at a certain time in your life. He not only opens the door, but he equips you with exactly what you need to do the job for as long as he wants you to do that job. And I was able to work in Israel from 1984 till 1989 as news anchor for World News, reporting on world events, meeting world leaders, Margaret Thatcher, George Bush, Henry Kissinger, Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, Margaret Thatcher, Queen Noor al-Hussein. It was an amazing experience for a 20-year-old fresh out of a bomb shelter in Lebanon, thrown in the world stage with all these people and all these receptions at fancy 5-star hotels. It was an amazing transition. But it was during that transition that I ended up meeting my American husband, who was a war correspondent, getting married in Jerusalem, and coming to the United States in 1989 as a wife of an American man with a child. At that time, my first baby was born in Jerusalem. So I have a Sabra, as they say in Hebrew, and I ended up coming to the United States. And I thought I left all the crazies behind. We started a TV production company. My clients were Oprah, Dr. Phil, ABC, NBC, CBS, The Morning Show, you name it. But then when 9/11 happened, up to that point, I was living the American dream. 2 children, working 6 months in the entertainment industry, enjoying all the perks of the entertainment industry, and playing the other 6 months at home with my children. 9/11 changed my world. 9/11, 2001, it made me realize what I left behind has followed me to the United States.
Wow.
And that's a whole other story, how I decided to become an activist.
Well, that's really fascinating. And by the way, we're going to have to get our crack research team on finding some clips of you back when you were at GNN and maybe even that replacement anchor. We need to see if we can find some clips of that anchor who got the job before you.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. But I was going to ask.
Well, if you Google Brigitte Gabriel Thanksgiving, I had done a Thanksgiving message to our members at Act for America, at my organization, with video that my husband had produced to show when we got married in the United States. We had 2 weddings, one in Jerusalem at Christ Church in the old city of Jerusalem, and another wedding here in the U.S. for all his family and friends, obviously, who could not attend the wedding in Jerusalem. And he made a video about my life, my bomb shelter, pictures of me and my mother, my school, me going to Israel, me being on the air. And he played it before I walked down the aisle at Rock Church when we got married in the United States.
Well, in all likelihood, they're seeing it as you talk about it right now. They're seeing it as you're talking about it, because our team will get on that. But it's so amazing. But what still, even as a top reporter in Jerusalem, it is a big transition coming over to America and then making such a big splash. Then 9/11 hits and everything changes for you as you see what you kind of fled away from coming here, and you begin to start ACT, which is a tremendous organization, the largest grassroots organization of its kind in the United States. So tell us about kind of the birth of this movement that you've been at the head of.
Well, Alan, I'm a firm believer that every single one of us has a purpose in life. Every single one of us has a destiny to fulfill. Nothing happens by chance. Everything happens by design. And we are all called to serve. Some people live a lifetime without recognizing their purpose. I was so fortunate to recognize my purpose at a young age, right at 9/11. See, on 9/11, 9/11 was a defining moment for the United States. 9/11 changed our lives, changed the way we travel, changed the way we live, changed the way we bank, changed the way we live. And on 9/11 was such a unifying moment for America. We all did the same thing, actually, to the world. We all did the same thing on 9/11. We were glued to our television screen. We couldn't believe our eyes. If you were close to a TV set, you were standing in front of that TV set watching the news in disbelief. And it doesn't matter where we were in the world, whether you were in the United States or whether you were outside of the United States, the whole world was stunned. And on that day, we all did the same thing, not only watch television, but we all were depressed. We all felt sad. We all felt frustrated. We all could not believe that somebody would hate us so much that they would hijack airliners and use them as human missiles and fly them into skyscrapers to kill tens of thousands of people. We were fortunate that the attack did not happen 15 minutes later. We would have lost 52,000 people that day who worked in the World Trade Center.
Wow.
So that day, I was watching television like everybody else, glued to my TV set, and my daughters came home from school. And, at school, they didn't tell them what happened that day. So my kids came in. I'm watching the images of the World Trade Center come down again and again. It's being replayed, live television. The anchors are just talking about what's happening at Ground Zero. And my youngest daughter, who was around 10 years old, looks at me and she says, "Mommy, why did they do this to us?" And I remember looking at my daughter, Ellen, and repeating to her the exact same words my father said to me when I was 10 years old, her age, laying in a hospital in Lebanon, hooked up to IVs, needles in both arms, and asking my father, why did they do this to us? And I had to repeat to her the same words my daddy said to me. They hate us because they consider us infidels and they want to kill us. Here we were, 2 generations apart. I was a young Lebanese girl. She's a young American girl. I spoke English. I spoke Arabic. She speaks English. 8,000 miles away, 2 continents away, 30 years apart. I had to say to her the exact same thing. That day was my defining moment. That day I vowed that I will do everything I can to make sure that my daughter will never ever have to look into her child's eyes and repeat to him or to her, yet unborn, what my daddy said to me and what I had to say to her. That day I was reborn as an activist. That day, September 11th happened on a Tuesday morning. I remember from Tuesday morning until Sunday afternoon, laying in my pajamas in my family room couch watching television, thinking and praying, God, what can I do to serve my country? What can I do to make a difference? Just praying, not only praying for the lives of the victims, because as I watch television, watching the smoke coming out from the World Trade Center, we're hearing the voices of the people calling for their loved ones buried under the rubble. I could smell the smoke. I know exactly how that smoke smells like. Hearing the people calling for the names of their loved ones, I can hear my parents screaming my name as I was pinned under a wall. And they would even hear my voice. I could barely get my voice out. So I knew the pain. And out of that pain, I was determined to make a difference. And finally, after 7 days of praying, I realized I have found my purpose. I'm going to become a voice educating people about the threat to Western civilization, to our culture, to our values from radical Islam, the threat to national security and world peace. And I wanted to educate millions of people about this threat. And I realized that was my purpose. I knew I'm a Middle Eastern woman who looks Middle Eastern, who's fluent in the Arabic language. That's my mother tongue. I was a reporter and a news anchor, so I know how to speak in sound bites. I know how to speak to the media. And I realized I have a gift of communication, and I'm a survivor. I'm not only somebody who went to college and studied terrorism. I am an eyewitness to evil who lived to tell about it.
Wow.
And I realized I'm going to start an organization. I looked around at the conservative organizations out there, and I realized there are great organizations in our country. There are great organizations that focus on family, on education, on the Second Amendment, on a lot of other, there's the Option on the Family, there's the NRA, there's CWA. There are plenty of organizations on the right. But there was not one organization devoted to preserving and protecting freedom and national security.
Wow.
And I realized that's what I'm going to start. And I started Act for America. And I started traveling. And I started speaking nationwide. And I would speak to people to groups as big as 10,000 people sitting in a mega church, and to groups as small as 7 people meeting at Frankie's Ribs in Pungo, Virginia at 7 a.m. in the morning.
Good ribs. Good ribs.
The average age being 80. And every other word it was, huh? That's why I speak, loud with a, high voice. So, but of all the speaking that I did, 6 years speaking between 2002 until 2007 with a New York Times bestseller, I realized we're not lacking education. Education is important, but we're not lacking education about the problem. You can go to Google and type in terrorism, type in radical Islam, type in, socialism. You get 60,000 pages. We are not lacking information. What we are lacking is what to do with the information.
Come on. Yes.
People hear me speak and they say, Brigitte, I understand the problem, but tell me what to do. Give me something to do. And I realized while education is important, education by itself is not sufficient. Education must be coupled with action. And that's when I launched Act for America, our lobbying arm, our 501c4. So we have a 501c3, a nonprofit organization. We have a 501c4 where we are able to lobby. And I'm proud to tell you that today, Act for America has over 1.7 million members. We have helped pass 178 bills on the federal level and the state level to protect the country. And I encourage people, if this message resonates with you, if you are touched by what I'm saying, go to actforamerica.org and click on Get Involved. Sign up to get our emails and action alert and become a voice affecting your community and our nation. And one thing I want to add, Ellen, every single one of us has a purpose in life. All of you who are watching us right now, wherever you're watching us from, on television, on the internet, on your iPhone, everybody has an iPhone. God has a purpose for your life. God doesn't change the world through lightning in the sky. God changes the world through his people. We are God's instrument walking down in our communities, walking down the street. We are the ones that he uses to change the world, to make it a better place.
Yes.
And every single one of us is called to serve. And I want you to pray today, all of you who are watching us right now, what is God calling you to do today? How are you serving? How are you making a difference as a Christian? Pray about that. And go to actforamerica.org. And I'm so grateful for you, Pastor, for bringing me on this show to share this message with your listeners.
Well, it's our honor. And in the same way you said, information is not enough. Action is needed. Prayer is essential, but faith without works is dead. Prayer without action is useless and lifeless, and we need to put some action. It's not enough just to get frustrated. We've got too many Christians who think watching political news channels and getting partisan and yelling at the TV is action. That's not action. You need to get involved, and your organization has actually broadened itself from what it originally started as to bring that information about what we were fighting against, one of the existential threats to liberty and freedom around the world, but you've expanded it to any issue that's facing every single person's community. So they can, if I've got this straight, they can go to your website and they can sign up and they can find out what's happening in their state, in their region, and how to get particularly involved. Is that right?
Exactly. When we started Act for America, you know, at that time, after 2001, the only threat to the United States was radical Islamic terrorism. China wasn't the power that it is today.
Right.
Iran was not developing nuclear weapons. Antifa did not exist. The border was not open as it is today.
Wow.
So as the threats evolved, we evolved with it. I mean, I remember back in 2014 working on stopping the Iran deal. I remember, you know, working with President Trump on securing or on redoing our immigration laws and securing our border. I remember back in 2010 working on missile defense in Europe and strengthening our missile defense. So as the threats evolved, our job is protect America from all threats, foreign and domestic. So right now, when you go on our website, actforamerica.org, and you see the Act Now, we have Act Now National, Act Now State. We not only educate you about the problem, but we want you to take action and make a difference. You can go to Act Now. We have an Act Now campaign to designate Antifa as a terrorist organization, for example. And it doesn't matter what state you live in. You go to Act Now campaign. You click on designate Antifa as a terrorist organization. You enter your address and zip code. We connect you directly with your elected officials. We give you their names on the federal level and the state level. You don't even have to know who they are. We have an email pre-written for you. You know, we ask you, do you want to email your elected officials? You click confirm. The email pops up. You read the email. Do you want to send this email to your elected official? Confirm. Click. It's sent to them. And then we have social media posts prepared for you. We have our professional team prepare Twitter tweets for you that you can share, Facebook messages you can share, professionally done. You don't even have to think about how to do it. If you want to call your elected officials, we give you their phone number, and we even give you a script act, what to say, when to call them. And so we have Act Now National. That's all the national bills we are working on. We notify you about, look, there is this bill coming down nationally. Make sure your voice is heard. And like right now, we have an Act Now campaign about exiting and defunding the World Health Organization. You know, Biden is about to turn the sovereignty of the United States to the World Health Organization, to the United Nations. So the United Nations is going to be deciding whether you get vaccinated or not. So this action alert now has over 6 million actions on it.
Wow.
That's under the federal level. On the state level, if you sign up to get our emails and action alerts, it doesn't matter what state you live in, whether you are in Wyoming or in Maine, whether you are in Alabama or in Florida. Once you register where you live, when there is state bills coming down for a vote, we notify you so you can take action. And it's like you said, Ellen, listening to talk radio, watching television, attending conferences, that's entertainment.
Yes.
You're watching a performer. You are watching a pundit. You are
Yes.
listening to an opinion. Going to a conference and getting so excited to go to a conference is great. You are around like-minded people. It's wonderful. Everybody is on a high. You get to take your pictures with the performing stars, whether they sing or whether they speak about political issues. They are performers. And when you finish the concert or the conference, you go home and you are on a high for a week. Oh my gosh, this conference, CPAC, whatever it happens to be, was fantastic. I met great people. You come home and a week later, you have no idea what to do to make a difference in your community.
Wow.
We take you and we teach you how you can make a difference, how to be effective in your activism. And you can do it on your cell phone under 2 minutes. We are mobilizing people to make a difference for the country.
You could do it right now. The link is in the description of this video. Within the next 2 to 5 minutes, you could have made a difference if you just act now. Brigitte Gabriel, it's such a blessing to have you with us on Encounter today. We're going to head over to Encounter Underground. I want to dig deeper into some of these issues and just have an uncensored conversation with you. Would you hang out with me just for a few more minutes?
Sure, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for being with us on this program. I think you've changed some minds and some lives here today.
Thank you.
God bless.
Thank you so much. It's my honor.